When I was 17, I believed my future had already been decided. I had planned every step with one person in mind, convinced that if I stayed close to him, everything else would somehow fall into place. Then, on the night before university acceptance letters were finalized, my laptop turned on by itself. The screen flickered through static before a woman appeared. She looked almost exactly like me, only older. Her hair was shorter, dark circles shadowed her eyes, and there was a sadness in her face so deep it made my chest tighten. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then she leaned toward the camera as if she were terrified time would run out. "Listen carefully," she whispered. "Do not give up your scholarship for Ryan. He never loved you the way you believed he did. He's been secretly dating your stepsister, Emma, for years. They only kept you close because you made everything easier." I froze, unable to breathe. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, convinced this had to be some elaborate prank. But the woman kept talking before I could ask a single question. "Tomorrow morning, buy one raffle ticket from the little bookstore on Oak Street. Don't question it. And whatever happens, never sell your grandfather's cottage by the lake. Everyone will tell you it's worthless, but they're wrong. In a few years that land will become the center of a luxury resort project. Promise me you won't let anyone take it away." My heartbeat pounded so loudly I could barely hear her next words. She listed a company whose stock would explode in value years later before disappearing from the market. She spoke about opportunities one had never imagined and mistakes that had haunted her for decades. Finally, tears filled her eyes. "Please," she said softly. "Choose yourself this time." The screen suddenly went black. I stared at my reflection for what felt like hours before grabbing a notebook from my desk. My hands shook as I wrote every detail she had mentioned. Scholarship. Raffle ticket. Grandfather's cottage. North Star Innovations. I underlined each one twice. Somewhere deep inside me, a tiny voice whispered that none of this was real. Yet another voice, the one that had seen the unbearable regret in that woman's eyes, begged me not to ignore the warning. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Ryan had sent a message. "You switched your university choice to Bayside University, right? Emma will be nervous if we aren't all together." Before I could answer, another notification appeared. Emma texted me a row of smiling emojis. "You're still coming with us." I knew my amazing big sister wouldn't leave me alone. I read the messages over and over until the words blurred together. Ryan had been my closest friend since childhood. We had built tree houses together, studied for exams together, and spent countless evenings talking about our dreams. I had quietly fallen in love with him years ago, never finding the courage to admit it. Emma became part of my life when my father remarried after my mother died. She was only a few months younger than me and always called me her favorite sister. Everyone thought we had the perfect blended family. Looking back, I realized I had always been the one making sacrifices. If Emma wanted the last slice of cake, I gave it to her. If Ryan wanted to change our plans because Emma preferred something else, I smiled and agreed. Somehow I had convinced myself that love meant making life easier for everyone else. That strange video shattered that illusion in a single night. My phone started ringing. Ryan's name filled the screen. I answered after a long pause. "Hey," he said warmly. "Everything okay?" "Applications close tomorrow." "They're finished," I replied. "Good." He laughed in relief. "I knew you'd make the smart decision." Smart for whom? The question stayed trapped inside my mind. Emma's cheerful voice echoed in the background. "Tell her we'll all celebrate together after graduation." Ryan repeated the invitation, assuming I would say yes like always. Instead, I simply told him I was tired and ended the call. It was the first time I had ever hung up before he finished talking. I barely slept that night. Before sunrise, I walked across town to the tiny bookstore the mysterious woman had mentioned. The elderly owner smiled politely as I asked for a raffle ticket. Feeling lucky, he joked. I smiled faintly. Maybe. As I tucked the ticket safely into my wallet, I felt something unfamiliar growing inside me. Hope. It was small and fragile, but it was there. On my way home I cut through Riverside Park, expecting empty walking paths. Instead, voices drifted from behind a row of flowering bushes. I recognized Ryan immediately. I hate lying to Ava, he murmured. But if she goes to Westbridge University, Emma will panic. She depends on her too much. Emma giggled softly. You're awful. Maybe, Ryan replied, laughing. But things are easier this way. Ava always says yes eventually. Then came the unmistakable sound of a kiss. My feet refused to move. Every childhood memory I had treasured cracked apart in silence. Emma sighed happily. Do you think she'll ever find out about us? Ryan answered without hesitation. Not until after graduation. By then it'll be too late for her to change anything. I quietly stepped backward before either of them noticed me. My eyes burned, but strangely, I didn't cry. The pain was real, yet it was drowned beneath an overwhelming sense of clarity. For the first time in my life, I understood that the future standing in front of me belonged to me alone. Whatever happened next, I would never again allow someone else's happiness to become more important than my own. I returned home just before noon with the raffle ticket hidden inside my jacket pocket as if it were the most valuable thing I owned. My father was already sitting at the dining table reading the newspaper while my stepmother prepared lunch. Emma looked up from her phone and smiled brightly the moment she saw me. There you are. Ryan has been trying to reach you all morning. I simply nodded and headed upstairs. I didn't trust myself to look at her for more than a few seconds. Every time I remembered what I had overheard in the park, another piece of the image I had built around my family collapsed. My room suddenly felt different. The posters on the walls, the photographs from school trips, the birthday cards Ryan had given me over the years, they no longer brought comfort. Instead, they reminded me how easily people could pretend. Around 3 o'clock my phone rang again. Ryan. This time I answered almost immediately. Where have you been? He asked. Emma wanted all of us to meet at the cafe. I was busy. Busy doing what? I smiled faintly. It amused me that he had never questioned my schedule before. Now, after one morning of silence, he sounded almost nervous. Just thinking about my future, I replied. He laughed as though I had made a joke. Your future is already planned. We'll all be together in Bayside. His confidence was almost unbelievable. He wasn't asking what I wanted. He was reminding me of the decision he expected me to make. We'll see, I answered before ending the call. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I logged into the university application portal one last time. My acceptance to Westbridge University was still waiting for confirmation. It had been my dream school since I was 14. I had almost rejected it because Ryan insisted Bayside would be better for all of us. My fingers rested on the keyboard for several long moments. Then I clicked the confirmation button. A message appeared on the screen. Congratulations. Your enrollment has been successfully accepted. I stared at those words until tears blurred my vision. For years I had believed choosing myself meant hurting everyone else. Yet the moment I made the decision, I felt lighter than I had in a very long time. The next morning the raffle drawing was broadcast online. I almost convinced myself not to watch. The mysterious woman could have been lying. The ticket could be completely worthless. But curiosity won. I opened the live stream just as the winning numbers appeared one after another. My heart stopped. Every single number matched the ticket lying on my desk. I checked once. Twice. Then a third time because my hands were shaking too violently to trust my own eyes. I had actually won. It wasn't enough money to make me one of the richest people in the country, but it was enough to pay for my education, rent an apartment near campus, and begin building a life that belonged entirely to me. I laughed so hard I started crying. It felt impossible. A single decision had already changed everything. Later that afternoon, Ryan and Emma came over without warning. My father welcomed them inside while I remained upstairs pretending to organize my books. A knock echoed through my bedroom door. Before I could answer, Emma walked in carrying 2 iced coffees. "You've been acting strange," she said gently, placing one on my desk. "Did we do something wrong?" I looked into her eyes, searching for guilt, but all I saw was concern so convincing it almost fooled me again. "No," I answered quietly. "I've just been thinking." Ryan leaned against the doorway with his hands in his pockets. "About Westbridge?" he asked. "It's not too late to change your mind." "Why would I?" His smile faltered. "Because we'll all be happier together." I met his gaze without looking away. "Will all of us?" For the first time since I'd known him, Ryan looked uncomfortable. He quickly recovered with an easy laugh. "You're overthinking things." Emma stepped closer and squeezed my hand. "Please don't leave us." There was something almost desperate in her voice, but instead of making me feel guilty, it made me wonder how long they had expected me to shape my entire life around theirs. After they left, I opened the notebook where I had written the mysterious woman's warnings. Every prediction so far had come true. I carefully added another sentence beneath the others. "Never ignore the truth simply because it hurts." Days later, acceptance letters officially arrived in the mail. My father proudly opened mine before handing it over with a wide smile. "Westbridge University," he exclaimed. "I knew you could do it." Before I could respond, Emma's expression froze. Ryan, standing beside her, looked as though the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. "Westbridge," he repeated slowly. "I thought." He couldn't finish the sentence. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into its envelope. "Plans change," I said calmly. Neither of them spoke another word for the rest of the afternoon, but I noticed the frightened glances they kept exchanging whenever they thought I wasn't looking. For the first time, it wasn't me who feared the future. It was them. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected, but beneath the silence I could feel something changing. Ryan no longer texted me every morning. Emma still smiled whenever we crossed paths in the hallway, yet there was tension behind her cheerful expression that hadn't existed before. Every conversation between the 3 of us felt rehearsed, as though they were both waiting for me to admit I had made a mistake by choosing Westbridge. Instead, I threw myself into preparing for university. I rented a small apartment near campus using part of my raffle winnings and secretly invested the rest exactly as the woman from the video had instructed. Every decision I made was deliberate now. I read contracts carefully, researched every investment twice, and stopped asking other people what they thought I should do with my life. It was strangely peaceful. One evening my father asked everyone to gather in the living room. His face looked exhausted, and he kept rubbing his forehead while my stepmother sat beside him in complete silence. Emma avoided looking at me altogether. I immediately remembered another warning from the mysterious woman. "Your father will ask for the cottage." My stomach tightened. "There's a problem," my father began quietly. "The construction company I partnered with has gone bankrupt. I've lost far more money than I expected." My stepmother reached for his hand. "We're going to be all right," she said softly before turning toward me. "But we need everyone's help." I didn't say anything. My father inhaled deeply. "A developer offered to buy your grandfather's cottage yesterday. They made a generous offer. If you agree to sell it, we can pay off the debts and avoid losing the house." There it was. Exactly as I had been warned. The room fell silent. Emma finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ava, it's only an old cabin. Nobody lives there anymore. I looked at her for a long moment. She wasn't being cruel. She genuinely believed she was asking for something reasonable. That realization somehow hurt even more. Why does it have to be my cottage? I asked calmly. My father looked surprised by the question. Because it's valuable. Then why wasn't it valuable before you needed money? No one answered. My stepmother forced a smile. Families help each other during difficult times. I agree, I replied. So tell me something first. If I sell the cottage to save everyone's future, whose future am I actually saving? Once again, silence filled the room. I slowly looked from my father to my stepmother, then to Emma. My father eventually lowered his eyes. He didn't need to answer. We all knew the truth. The family business, the savings, the investments, everything had always been intended for Emma someday. I was being asked to sacrifice the only thing my grandfather had left me to protect an inheritance that would never belong to me. My father finally spoke, though his voice sounded uncertain. You're my daughter. Of course you'll always have a place here. I smiled sadly. A place isn't the same as a future. My words seemed to strike everyone at once. Emma's eyes filled with tears. I never wanted to take anything from you. Maybe not intentionally, I answered. But you've never had to wonder whether your dreams mattered as much as someone else's. Ryan arrived at the house only minutes later, completely unaware of what had happened. When he saw everyone's expressions, he frowned. Did something happen? Emma immediately ran to him, wrapping her arms around him without thinking. The room became perfectly still. The moment she realized what she had done, she stepped back so quickly she nearly stumbled. Ryan looked horrified. No one said a word. I simply watched them. There was no satisfaction, no anger, only certainty. You don't have to explain, I said quietly. My father stared at Ryan in confusion. Explain what? Ryan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Emma began crying almost immediately. Dad. Before she could continue, I interrupted. They've been together for a long time. The words landed like thunder. My father's face turned pale while my stepmother looked from Emma to Ryan in complete disbelief. Ryan finally stepped forward. We didn't mean to hurt anyone. I almost laughed. No. You just expected me to keep rearranging my life so yours would stay comfortable. Emma covered her face with both hands. We were going to tell you eventually. After I followed you across the country? I asked. Neither of them answered. My father slowly sank back into his chair as though years had suddenly settled onto his shoulders. Is this true? He whispered. Emma nodded through her tears. Ryan looked down at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. I realized then that the greatest betrayal wasn't their relationship. It was how confidently they had assumed I would always choose their happiness over my own. That night I packed a suitcase, drove to my grandfather's cottage by the lake, unlocked the weathered wooden door, and stood alone in the quiet living room. Moonlight reflected across the water outside the windows, and for the first time since that impossible video call, I finally felt as though I was exactly where I was meant to be. Whatever came next, my future would no longer belong to anyone else. Life changed faster than I could have imagined. Within a month I had moved into my apartment near Westbridge University, started classes, and settled into a routine that finally revolved around my own dreams instead of someone else's expectations. The distance from home gave me room to think. Some evenings I still remembered the years I had spent believing Ryan would always stand beside me, but those memories no longer controlled me. They became reminders of the person I refused to become again. A few months later, the prediction about North Star Innovations came true almost exactly as the mysterious woman had described. The company's shares climbed at a breathtaking pace after announcing a revolutionary energy project. Because I had invested early, my savings multiplied far beyond anything I had imagined possible. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about tuition, rent, or the future. Yet the greatest gift wasn't the money. It was freedom. Freedom to make choices without depending on anyone else's approval. Back home, my father's financial problems became worse. The developer who had offered to buy my grandfather's cottage suddenly returned with a proposal worth nearly 10 times the original price after the government announced plans for a luxury lakeside district. Reporters called it the biggest redevelopment project in decades. Overnight, the little wooden cottage everyone had dismissed as worthless became one of the most valuable properties in the region. My phone rang constantly after the announcement. My father called first. His voice sounded older than I remembered. "Ava. I finally understand why you refused to sell." "It wasn't only about the money," I answered quietly. "I know." He remained silent for several seconds before continuing. "I'm sorry. I should have protected what Grandpa left you instead of asking you to give it away." It was the first genuine apology I had ever heard from him. I accepted it, but I couldn't pretend the past had never happened. Some wounds heal into scars instead of disappearing. Emma contacted me a week later. She asked if we could meet at a small cafe halfway between our cities. I agreed, more out of curiosity than hope. She looked exhausted when she arrived. The confidence she had carried for years had vanished. "Ryan and I broke up," she admitted after a long silence. "We spent so much time hiding the truth that eventually we stopped trusting each other." I listened without interrupting. "I owe you an apology," she continued, tears filling her eyes. "I always believed you'd understand everything because you were stronger than me. I never realized I was asking you to carry burdens that weren't yours." For the first time, her words sounded completely honest. I reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. "I don't hate you, Emma." She looked surprised. "Really?" I smiled sadly. "No. Hate would mean I'm still living in the past. I've moved on." She began crying quietly. Before we left, she hugged me, not because she expected forgiveness, but because she finally understood what she had lost. Years passed. I graduated with honors, founded a small investment company, and restored my grandfather's lakeside cottage instead of selling it. Rather than becoming another luxury villa, it became a scholarship center for students whose families pressured them to abandon their education or dreams for someone else's benefit. Every year I met young people who reminded me of the girl I used to be. Whenever they apologized for choosing themselves, I smiled and told them the same words I had once needed to hear: "Your future isn't selfish. It's yours." One rainy evening, long after the scholarship foundation had become successful, I returned alone to the restored cottage. The old laptop I had stored in a closet years earlier caught my attention. Curiously, I plugged it into the wall. The screen remained black for several moments before suddenly flickering to life. A blank recording window opened by itself. My heart skipped a beat. I slowly realized what was happening. This was the moment. The woman who had saved me all those years ago had always been me. Tears blurred my vision as I pressed the record button. I leaned toward the camera exactly as I remembered seeing her do. "Listen carefully," I whispered. "Don't give up your scholarship for Ryan. Choose yourself. Buy the raffle ticket. Keep Grandpa's cottage. Trust your instincts, even when everyone tells you you're making the wrong decision." My voice trembled, but I kept speaking until every warning had been recorded. When I finally finished, the screen flashed once before going completely dark. I sat there smiling through my tears. The impossible circle had closed. My future hadn't been changed by luck alone. It had changed because, when the opportunity appeared, I had found the courage to believe I deserved a life that belonged to me. As the sun rose over the lake the following morning, its light reflected across the calm water outside my window. I stood on the porch listening to birdsong, grateful not for my wealth or success, but for a single decision made years earlier. I had stopped living for someone else's story and finally become the author of my own.